Today, talking about some philosophy, right? Because I think that is so important in general, and specifically in crypto anarchy, because crypto anarchy is a very strong philosophy based on sound and solid first principles. And I think that's why it's so interesting to analyze this a bit more and to explore here. In general, I want to make two cases here. First is one for a methodological approach, right, which is praxeology, right, starting based on first principles and then elaborating logically on top. And then second, I want to explore actually what is manifesting here based on what in first principle we choose and what logically follows, specifically in the light of privacy, as this is so important for us, of course, as cypherpunks and crypto anarchists. That's why I want to start with the first principles, right? This is so important. First of all, why do I think that these first principles are a meaningful or a useful strategy to pursue? And that basically is because there's an understanding or realization that I don't know, right? There's so much uncertainty, there's so many unknown unknowns, and there are countless things that I have to assume to be correct or to be false, right? But I cannot logically prove it. And this is very, very important to understand what you actually do not know, what you cannot prove, right? A assumption, a first principle. For example, in geometry, two parallel lines never meet. That's an assumption. We can't really prove it. However, when we assume this, we can build logically on top to a quite monumental and beautifully complex architect and structure. And this is why I think this is such an important methodological approach. It really gives you a strong foundation to stand on and to build upon, but it's also so important to continuously check back and verify on these first principles. Because if they are flawed, right, if you're building your house on sand, if these assumptions are ludicrous, are not reasonable to make, then all the logical construct that is built on top will fall into pieces and crumble to ashes. And however, contrarily, if that first principle is solid and actually verified, then we can really rely on the results that we receive. And this is why I'm such a huge fan of this praxeological approach. It's extremely solid. And it took me a couple of years to not just define these first principles, but also to refine them and to fine-tune them and to see if there are deeper assumptions that can be made to still uphold this logical construct on top. And today I want to make that case that the one important assumption, something that I cannot prove, but something that I think is super meaningful and useful to assume to be correct, is that I, the individual, exist. And that there is an individual core, that I am, that I manifest, that I am here, in the here and now, observing. Right? I am that observer that out of a hyperposition makes the binary fates. Right? In this vast pool of uncertainties and falsehoods and inaccuracies, I exist as a strong fundamental pillar. And this doesn't have to be assumed. There's an entire branch of collectivism that assumes exactly the opposite, that the individual does not exist, but rather a construct of multiple pieces coming together as a collective, and that this collective exists and shapes and acts. And I think this is quite a ludicrous assumption, and the logical consequences from that, I think, are quite drastic. Unfortunately, not much time to talk into this today, because I want to focus on what we actually can build when we assume that individuals exist, because that fundamentally means that there is a concept of scarcity, of exclusivity, right? That there is one individual who occupies one space in time, and this space or this body is exclusively controlled by one individual, not by another, right? I act, I move my body, I speak, and this is me doing it. It is not you. You do not control me. You do not enforce me to act in a certain way. But this is my free choice to allocate my own scarcity, my own body, that exclusive resource that I receive as an individual. We never say that I am my body, but that I have a body. Right? This bodily form is a resource, a scarce resource that I have exclusive control over, whom I have property rights in. And this is what I can allocate throughout time. But again, scarcity is an aspect of rivalry, of potential conflict that might arise over the question, who actually controls a scarce resource that only one individual can control? And this is where that aspect of uneasiness, of suffering comes in. There is only a limited and an exclusive quantity of scarce resources available, and I have a bunch of problems, and I want these problems to be fixed, right? But there are hindrances in this, right? I'm hungry, and I need to do something about this. I need to act, because I am in a current state of uneasiness. I have a problem, and this is what I want to solve. And this is the state of suffering that the individual is in. Being uncomfortable and well, in a problem. Though the genius and creative spark that the individual entrepreneur has is to imagine a potentially superior state, right? To imagine that there exists something that will fix my problems, right? That I can manifest to improve my situation from what it is now to what it will be in the future. And this is basically the entrepreneur venturing out into a huge pool of darkness and uneasiness and uncertainty. And there is so much potential, meaning endless amounts of different options that the individual can choose what to pursue. And of course, with more creativity comes more options, comes more potentialities that could be manifested. And the aspect of choice is to prioritize these, to find out the most important, the most meaningful, the most valuable task that the individual can do right now. That where he can allocate his scarce time, his scarce resources to manifest the most delightful and most meaningful way. And this is choice. This is a obliteration of everything but one. We burn all the other opportunities that we have to the ground, and we only act on one. And this is what is the marginal preference, and which is verified or shown in human action. Right? Me speaking right here, right now on stage is a proof that there's absolutely nothing more meaningful for me to do than be right here and talk to you. Right? And that is a gigantic compliment, basically, to you all, because I think that you are that important individuals to talk to, that I have assumed before me walking on stage that after me giving this talk, I'm better off than before. Right? And there were plenty of other things. I could be outside, right, and talking to others. But this is not what I deemed for myself to be the most meaningful, the most important, the most urgent thing to do. And I've obliterated all of these other things, which is again a huge suffering. Right? This is a huge opportunity cost. All of the other things that I could have done, a plenitude. And it is a sacrifice to actually decide on what to do. And that's why it's so difficult to decide and to take action, because there's such a huge cost involved of shrinking down this gigantic pool of darkness into one concrete point in action and in time. And here is also where that aspect of time comes in. Right? There's a past, which is the uneasiness that the individual has felt in the past, and a current point where he is in right now, where he realizes that he is suffering, that there are problems. And he has that creative spark to come up with a better future, to think of solutions, right? And then finally to act, and that is to manifest change, right? To fix the problem, to do the work. And this is the aspect of progress, of advancement, of time, right? There's a point before the action and after the action, and that change of the state, that is time. And therefore it also comes into time preference. Right? I would prefer to have my problems fixed sooner rather than later, right? Because my time is again one of the scarce resources that I use, and it is exclusive in the sense that I can only allocate my time to one certain task at one certain point. And therefore the question of resource allocation is incredibly important. What do you actually do with the capital that you have, with the goods that you control, with the natural resources, with your bodily form, with your time, with your attention, with your energy? And here again, that aspect of vast opportunity and obliterating all but one to then manifest in the action is resource allocation. And that is the core archetype of the entrepreneur, right? To discover what a problem is, not just now, but also in the future, right? To anticipate future problems, and then already to anticipate future solutions to these very difficult problems, and then to actually do it. Not just to talk about it, but to act. And I think this is the heroic entrepreneurial archetype that I love so much. Though very interesting to see is that up until this point, I'm talking about a private individual, a isolated individual. an individual who has not revealed himself to other individuals. He is anonymous, so to say. He is on his own. Nobody can attribute, or nobody can orient that he even exists, and nobody can attribute certain actions to this individual because he has not yet revealed himself. He has not yet engaged in interaction, not just to act by himself, but to act in accordance with another individual and to receive that feedback of the reaction of this other individual. Right? So the entire concept that we've built up until now is solid for the isolated individual, where we assume nothing else but that one individual exists. And this is, I think, quite a profound logical achievement already in just this short of time. But of course, it goes much, much further. In many, many circumstances, the individual is not isolated. Right? There is a choice from the individual to selectively reveal himself to others. For example, right now, I choose to reveal myself to all the people in this room and everyone walking in, as well as all the people in cyberspace watching. But this is a choice for me. Right? I did not have to come on stage. It was one of the many, many potentials that I could choose from. But it was the one that I deemed for myself to be the most delightful, the most meaningful, and that is why I have revealed myself. And this has multiple consequences. First and foremost, that I am being observed, that you guys see me, right? And I see you. This means that there is, again, a potential for conflict, because we are in the realm of scarcity, meaning any scarce good can only be controlled by one individual. And now if there are many individuals, the scarce resource, for example, of my body, is very much in a potential danger. Because what happens when all of you decide that this is a juicy piece of meat that you would love to eat, right? Then I'm in serious trouble. And I would not be in that risk if you weren't there, if you would not observe me, right? If I would not have revealed myself to you and to this world. So that aspect of privacy is in a sense security, because it removes that potential that other individuals will mess with your scarce resources, with your property. And this is one of the major downsides of revealing yourself. If nobody knows that you exist, nobody can steal from you. If nobody knows how much money you have, then they don't know if it's worth to steal from you and to go through all that trouble. So to be a private individual, an isolated individual, means that on the benefit side, that scarcity can be, and the according ownership and property rights in it, is defined by the individual and verified and enforced by the individual. Right? If there's nobody else to make a claim on your property, nobody else trying to take what is yours, then you are sovereign. Then you're defendable, and you actually are free, and nobody messes with the things that you have. And that's quite a good achievement, but there are many, many downsides to it, right? Because, well, monkeys are kind of nice, right? And monkeys are social creatures, and to hang around to others is in general interesting. And I think one of the reasons is because it enables a feedback loop, right? When I not just act by myself, but interact with others, then my actions have obviously, as in any situation, consequences. And these consequences I can observe again. Right? I can observe your reaction, how you look, how you tilt your head, how you react to what I speak. And I can take on this feedback and observe it and orient myself in accordance to you and to your reaction, and I can better understand of what is going on currently in that situation. I get a new feedback, right? That is incredibly useful because it shows me if I'm correct or wrong. Right? If I say a stupid statement and you all shake your head vehemently and disagree with me loudly, well, then I might reconsider my thoughts on that subject. Right? And I will advance my understanding of it further based on that feedback that I got from externally, that knowledge that I took in from the outside realm. But nevertheless, that understanding is always internal. Always internal. You can never make me understand something that I don't. You can package information nicely and present it to me in an adequate form that might help me to understand, but fundamentally that reaching a conclusion, to make that prioritization of your values and to find out what exactly you want to do, that is always an internal act and an internal process. And finally, the question is, do you act actually? Do you align your thoughts and your actions to what you have discovered to be true? right? And this is again where feedback from others is so valuable. Because if I don't get that feedback and I'm in a completely wrong rabbit hole, then I'm going to have the problem that I'm never going to discover that I'm actually on the wrong track. And I will continue and continue and continue down that wrong rabbit hole, wasting a bunch of my scarce resources, my time and attention. And therefore getting that feedback early is very valuable for me, again, to be more productive in my resource allocation. So that aspect of being a revealed individual, right? Not a private, not an anonymous individual, but gathering that feedback, that reputation is very useful. And of course, further, monkeys can do stuff, right? Monkeys can act, they can fix problems. And the very nice thing is that when others fix a problem for me, I don't have to fix it, right? So that's very useful. This means that I can solve more problems if others help me, right? If I interact with others. And now the question is, how do you interact? And I would say that there are two fundamentally opposed and completely antagonal ways of collaborating. One is the economic means, based on voluntary interaction, where both sides of the party, of the trade, can make their own free priorities of how they would like to act. All these potentials, they are going to prefer precisely to according to their will. And they will choose whichever is most profitable for them. And as long as both parties do this, as long as it is mutually beneficial, that is the entrepreneurial, the economic mean, the productive mean, where value is created on both sides. Right? When a trade happens, both sides are better off than they were before. Otherwise, they would not have made the trade. And that aspect of creating value, of manifesting something beautiful and delightful, that is economics. That is entrepreneurship. And this is one beautiful aspect to work together. The other is where there is no freedom in how to prioritize and no freedom in which of these options to choose. So someone else estimates what your subjective valuations of all the potential scenarios are, and someone else, not you, makes that choice on how to allocate these scarce resources, that is your body, your time, your capital, all of these. And this fundamentally, where an outside individual makes that choice above an other individual, that is theft, that is tyranny, that is well, just not efficient, basically, by definition again. Because the other party did not consensually agree to this. And the main downside to this then is that he does not show, he does not prove that there was value created. He frankly did not really want to have that other good and service that the other party offered. But he was forced to accept it. Right? So there is no proof, no showcase that value was created. Quite contrary, because there was no free choice involved, the value has been destroyed. Provably, in every case, one party has a benefit, the thief, and one party is suffering, the victim. And that is an inherent case, all times, every time, when we talk about politics. It is completely antithetical to freedom, to individuality, to prosperity, to that aspect of creating, that courageous act to fix problems. It is actively a work against that, and in the complete antithesis. And again, this is where that aspect of privacy comes in. Because when you are a private individual, isolated, not revealed to the world, then it is much more difficult for politicians to steal your property. Because they do not know that you exist and that you have all of this capital that is potentially interesting to loot. And here is where, again, I think that the strategy of crypto anarchy is so interesting. Because first and foremost, it is based on solid first principles, individual anarchy. Right? The individual is the sovereign ruler of the kingdom of self, and no external third party is doing this. And therefore, all of these logical constructs are still solid and based in crypto anarchy because it is an individualistic principle and philosophy. But second, it is extremely efficient because precisely it allows the individual to selectively reveal himself. And that aspect of choice is so inherent in human existence and in human action that it is so fundamental. And crypto anarchy builds on top of that. It thrives in that realm where individuals are free to choose. And it is so true in this aspect, and that's why I think that the Hackers Congress specifically, and what the peers at Parallel Polis have done, with forwarding that education and that understanding of this principle, is so incredibly valuable, and that's why I'm so happy to be here again on this talk. So I think this is roughly what I wanted to cover in a rough sketch outline, and I would be very delighted to hear your feedback, right? To hear your reaction on what I have proposed now, because again, I don't know, there is so much uncertainty, and I'm eager for that feedback to further articulate for myself this understanding to align my actions properly. So thank you very much for listening, and please speak up.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. I forgot to tell audience that they can ask all the time during your presentation, but you had a so beautiful presentation that it was not necessary. Anyway, so any questions?
Yeah.
We also check. Yeah. Okay.
Where does the individual end? So, would you think that kids are an extension of the individual, or a spouse, a husband, or wife, or a partner, whatever? And when would you think that using time for that extension of your individual is more important than the time for only yourself, for example?
Mm-hmm. That's a very difficult question, right? Where does that individuality come from, right? And when does it begin and when does it start? And again, it's for me it's an assumption. It's very difficult to speak clearly here on when the individual actually exists. Is it before birth, right? Or is it even before conception, right? Is the individual already in a realm around us and just not manifested in bodily form? Well, maybe. Or does it actually happen at conception, right? When you have the sex and the orgasm, that might be the euphoria of two individuals coming together, creating a third, potentially, right? Or is it at some point where the child is in the womb and fosters and grows his bodily form? Is this already the individual manifesting himself, right? Or is it the mother actually manifesting herself and changing within her own body to eventually kind of gift this bodily form to another individual? Maybe. Or is it specifically that point at birth, right, where the individual does reveal himself to the world, where he actually opens up and steps out and ventures out as the young fool that he is? This might be that point where the individual actually becomes into existence. Or it might be at a later state, right? Maybe for the first couple years, a small child is no individual at all, right? It cannot be self-sufficient, it cannot sustain itself. It does not know what is his. It does not orient himself. It cannot really act. It's a very vulnerable creature. Is that already an individual, right? Or does it come at a certain point in time? Now, bureaucrats believe that individuality starts at age 18 or 21, which is, of course, completely fucked up. But any of these previous options are reasonable, and quite frankly, I don't know.
I think it's fuzzy, it's continuous, it's not like discrete. Any other questions? Okay. Alexander?
Yeah, thank you for a great presentation. If I go back to philosophical history, I found it to be quite Kantian. There's a lot of Immanuel Kant about the whole presentation. But if you go to Hegel as sort of a post-Kant in a creative way about 20, 30 years later, what would you say if you proposed rather that it is the government and the state that produced the individual, and we're here to set the individual free?
Yeah.
So you don't have the problem any longer of an individual that have to define when the individual starts or when the individual ends, because individuality is something the governments love, because if they want to lock you up, they create an individual and call it citizenship, and they hold you responsible for your actions according to their standards, and then they lock you up, which is the tyranny you're talking about. Because I completely agree on that one. But would it make it different for the rest of your philosophy if you rather said that, okay, we were just tribal creatures walking around, statehood came along, statehood was hijacked by certain people who had a certain sense of tyranny about them and loved power a bit too much, and they basically enslaved the rest of us. And one day they created the idea of the individual. And what if we hijacked that idea instead and said, okay, you produced us, but now we are those individuals, and now we can go against the government and say we can create a new era of history or something. We just are set free. What is your reaction to that sort of more Hegelian prospect of the subject?
This is basically a fundamental disagreement with the first principles, right? Because here the first principle is not individuality, but collectivism. The state exists, right? And the state is there. And the state acts and creates something. And the something that the state creates is the individual, right? So there is a fundamental disagreement on that first principle, right? And that's where, and the reason why I disagree with it is because I can very easily imagine a state of the private individual, where the individual exists on his own, self-sufficiently, without any other individual, without any collective, just on a lonely island or in the middle of the woods. You still exist, you're still there, although there is no other collective around you, no other individual. And because that is a possible, a reasonable scenario that I experience every time I close the bathroom door when I'm on the toilet, right? That's why I think that this is not really a reasonable or good approach.
Okay, it's funny because then we disagree strongly. We actually agree on tactics and strategy, and I find that wonderful.
Beautiful.
I'll be the Hegelian, you're the Kantian. Yes. Perfect.
Okay.
Hello. You say with more opportunity, with more creativity, we get more opportunity, we get more options. Today, comparison to old communist Russia or China, or we have the paralysis of choice. So many options. If you take an example of currency, instead of a state currency, now we can choose. So how do you think we should choose, for instance, currency, just as an example, on a massive scale, when we have so many options? Mm-hmm. How do we do this on a massive, how do we find consensus on a massive scale now when we have so many options about everything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. The more options you have, the larger is your opportunity cost, right? Well, not actually exactly, but rather, when you have more options, then usually there is one option that is marginally better than most others. And your opportunity cost is basically the second in line. So not your first best choice, but the second. Right? And this is your opportunity cost. So even when there are a plethora of other opportunities that you could choose, the real cost for you is just the second most valuable that it would have been to you. Right? So that's why I kind of disagree that with a plethora of choice, there's like that is a bad thing. It just means that we have more opportunities, but that aspect of ranking it marginally is still there, and that aspect to choose the best is still there, and the real opportunity cost is the second that you would have chosen if that first approach was not there. And how does that apply to money? Why is money useful, first of all? And again, based on my first principle, because it is an individual defense. Right? Individuals can utilize money to protect their scarce resources and their property rights in them. This means, first of all, to get paid, right? To demand to be paid, to say that I am producing something, I'm creating something of value, and I will give you that. I will do this for you, I will solve this problem for you, but only in exchange when I get something in return, and that something is usually money. Right? So that is that free aspect of expression to create value entrepreneurially as a revealed individual, no longer as a private, anonymous individual in isolation, but in that step of division of labor and collaboration. And of course, to hold your capital. Right? That is one of the major use cases of monetary good, to hold that capital for a prolonged time period, precisely because you're uncertain about what to choose. You have not yet done that marginal prioritization of all the goods and services that you want to have in the future. Because if you would have done this, then you would already spend your money today to buy the Lambo in the future, right? Or you would invest the money right now for exactly 45 days until you know exactly, and 45 days later at 12 o'clock, I want to get that Lambo, right? If you have all of this planned out, if there's no uncertainty at all, then you don't need money. You just buy the goods and services that you want at whatever time frame that you define in the contract. But that aspect of holding money is precisely to be in that realm of uncertainty, to not know exactly what you want in the future, and therefore to have the desire to hold a liquid good, a monetary asset that other individuals desire too, that other individuals demand to be paid in. Right? That aspect of liquidity is so important, and it is precisely there because you are uncertain about how much of what good you want at what time. And all these questions money solves. It removes a lot of uneasiness because you know you can buy anything that you want from anyone who demands to be paid in money at any point in time. Right? That's a huge hedge against this uncertainty. To know in whatever happens, I have money and that can buy me stuff. But of course, this comes then the question, where do you store that purchasing power, right? Where do you store this value? And this is fundamentally because demand is always uncertain. We got to worry about supply, and this is what is important in monetary theory. What is the monetary supply, and how does this increase or change over time? And here I would argue, as an entrepreneur, a stable, unchangeable value that I've defined, verified, and enforced for myself is the most certain that I can be, that I will have the same percentage of the money supply right now and in the future, and that helps me a lot in individual resource allocation. And I think these aspects is why a monetary good is important, and the best good that satisfies these desires of the individual as a use case, that monetary asset will win in the long term. And it is a strong network effect. And in the sense of competition in media of exchange, it's a zero-sum game. There's always one winner, there's always one loser when exchanging media of exchange. Fundamentally different than when exchanging a media of exchange for a good and service. Buying something is very different than to exchange foreign currencies.
Okay, another 2 questions. We have also another 2 questions from the internet, so ask.
Okay. So you probably know Schopenhauer. One can only do what one wishes, one can't choose one's wishes. Bad translation probably. Der Mensch kann zwar tun, was will, der kann nicht machen, was will. Der kann nicht wollen, was will. Ignoring universal determinism, because that's kind of a whole nother story we probably shouldn't get into in a simple question. Ignoring universal determinism, how do you feel that that relates to your view of the individual with regards to things like advertising, essentially pushing other people's will, changing what somebody wants, and therefore changing their actions? How does that fit in with your overall philosophy?
Advertising is the entrepreneur deciding to reveal himself to the world. It's an entrepreneur who chooses to go out and to venture and to seek opportunities, right? And to ask others if they have a problem and if they would like him to fix it. Fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with advertising. It's a fundamental human act of choosing privately or choosing to no longer be private and to reveal yourself. Very, very good thing. The issue is with fraud, right? If you promise to deliver something, or no, I shouldn't say promise. If you write a contract stating that you will deliver a good and service in exchange for money, you take the money and then you deliver a different good and service, right? That's fraud. That's theft. Someone stole your money and gave you something else in exchange that you didn't want. That is the evil aspect. So, and of course, there's a gradient in between. Where do you truthfully advertise your services? Where do you maybe look at it exclusively from a positive light and you don't explain trade-offs and downsides? Or where do you frankly just lie and say complete false things? This is again something where individuals will make many nuances, and I cannot make a blanket judgment statement. But fundamentally, there is a point where advertisement turns into fraud, and that is when something else is delivered than what was in the contract, because a contract is not a promise. It's not a promise. So breaking that is fraud and not just a small mistake.
Thanks.
Yes, coming up.
Descartes says that cogito ergo sum. I begin to exist when I realize the thought that I have the thought that I exist. In the beginning, you said that you're not sure that if we really exist. I mean, there's no proof, but why would you say that Descartes did not make this proof?
Well, I mean, basically that goes back to a question that we had earlier. At what point does that individuality life start, right? And so if you haven't asked specifically that question of do I exist ever, are you then, do you exist already? And I mean, yes, exactly. So for example, like a baby, or like an unborn baby or in the womb, probably has not asked himself the question of does he exist? But there's already something there, right? So I'm a bit uncertain, honestly. I don't know exactly how to answer that. Yes, I think. Because Mises calls it human action, right? He literally puts the term human in this. And that aspect to prioritize, to choose, and to act, and to manifest change is what is fundamentally human to me. Though this is actually kind of what I wanted to highlight a bit in this specific talk. I don't think that human action specifically is the nice starting point. I think we can go deeper because there's a lot of things already before human action, right? Like scarcity, like marginal preferences, and so on. All of this comes logically before human action. So this is why I titled this talk "Individual Existence," not individual action, because I think that is the axiom, that starting point, out of which scarcity can be deduced, suffering can be deduced, and action, or valuable subjective valuation can be deduced, and then action can be deduced. And this is kind of what I wanted to say here, building on top of Mises, that we can further distill and refine that first argument to actually become human existent.
It seems we switched to quite complex philosophical discussion.
Beautiful.
Anyway, so any question from audience? Because we have also the internet questions. Okay, so let's look at the internet question. So the first one, apart from the long-awaited book by Pavel, okay, that's me. Is there a book that teaches this? So the question is, you mentioned me in the beginning of your presentation that you are planning to write a book. So tell us more about your book.
Yes. First, the book that I can actually recommend is a book that I reread the last couple of days, and that's Ludwig von Mises, Theory and History, a beautiful philosophical treatise that describing exactly this methodological approach of individual first axioms, following logical reasoning on top, and where he really goes down into these different potential axioms to be chosen and what follows logically, as well as different just methodological approaches in general. A very, very valuable book, in my opinion. And as he said, I've thought about this for quite some time, and I'm curious if I'm actually on the right track. And for me, that process, or a process of finding that out, is to explain it to others and to teach it. And of course, giving talks is one of the things that I do to get that feedback. But in written form, I value that quite a lot. So the second book that I would like is The Praxeology of Privacy, which explains exactly that aspect, right? First choosing that methodological approach of praxeology, first principles and rational reasoning, to then explore specifically what privacy actually is and how this is so inherently human, and why, well, there's not necessarily a right for privacy, but it's just that individuals are inherently private beings, and they do choose to reveal themselves selectively. This is something that I would like to highlight. And as is most of my work, this is published for free and open source on GitHub under the MIT license. And specifically at this stage, I'm very much looking for contributors for a feedback on the methodological approach as well of the structure of my logic. So that is already on that GitHub repo. It's a pretty new one. And I would be actually really, really curious to hear your feedback if that line of reasoning in general makes sense, right? Because again, this is the feedback that I would like to receive to then further develop it and go into the nuances of it. So I think this is one of the books that hopefully will cover these topics adequately, but very, very early work in progress.
And we have another question, and the question is money only for uncertain people?
Sorry, what?
Is money only for uncertain people?
Oh, for uncertain people. Yes. If you're certain, you don't need money. Why? So, if you know exactly that tomorrow at 15 o'clock you want to have a delicious ribeye steak, right? So what you do is right now you go to Sushi Vidushi out there and tell the guy, please, a dried aged steak. I want it exactly at that time. Here's the money. Right? I pay you the money right now here already. Here's the exchange that we do. But I give you the money earlier than you actually deliver the good and service, so I would like to receive an interest rate on this. Right? This is basically a debt. I give you a 15-hour debt or something, and then you deliver that service. So I want to get it cheaper. Right? And that discount, that time preference that is shown here, would be more rational for you to do. Right? If you know exactly what you want tomorrow, then you pay for it now cheaper than you would pay for it tomorrow. Because the entrepreneur receives the money earlier, he's willing to do that at a lower price because, well, time is scarce. So so if you are really not certain about what you want tomorrow, you just buy it today. And you do that with your entire cash balance. You don't need cash at all if you know exactly what you want. But the problem is, if there is a change in the scenario that you did not consider, if there is one result of your action that you did not calculate for, and if there comes up a new desire in you that becomes the most valuable in your preference scale, then this means that you no longer have any capital, right? Because you've already spent everything on everything. So this is where entrepreneurial action comes in, right? You perceive that there is a potential in the future to solve a problem, and you want to do this. But because you are uncertain, because there are just so many vast-reaching possibilities, and because there's such a complex network of causal relations and cause and effect, it is just going to be extremely difficult to take everything into consideration. And it's possible, but it's very costly, right? It's going to cost you a lot of your time and resources to do all of these calculations, and it's very fragile, right? If you make a mistake, which entrepreneurs do all the time, it's very difficult to fix problems, and sometimes you don't, then you're completely bankrupt, right? Because there's no cash reserve that you have. So if you think that you're infallible and that you never make any mistakes, sure, don't hold any money. But if you are uncertain about the future, and if there are some things that you think that might change in the future, then holding money exactly protects you against that uncertainty, because you have that liquid capital to fix any problem that comes up in the future, of course, if you have that capability. But this is why actually I would say money is not for certain people. Money really is for those entrepreneurs who are uncertain about the future, which I think is a very reasonable thing to do, or to be, so therefore it's reasonable to hold a lot of money, specifically magical cyberspace money.
This is quite interesting because this can be said also, for example, about insurance.
Yes.
Insurance is also for uncertain people because, for example, I know one very rich guy and he doesn't pay any insurance, and he explained it doesn't make sense for him. Like, you know.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the thing. Insurance is another hedge against uncertainty. You outsource potential risk to someone else and you pay for that service. But does it make sense that at a certain point, if you have a bunch of money, if you have so much cash that any problem that comes up, even if it's a huge problem, you have enough capital, liquid, that you could hire other people to fix all of your problems, right? If that capital reserve, if that cash reserve is large enough to fix most problems that you can come up with, well, then you don't need to have any additional insurance, right? Because all edge cases are covered because you have just that much money. But of course, if you don't have that much money, if you have not yet built a huge cash reserve, then it does make sense to also get an insurance because it's rather cheap, right? But you protect yourself against a huge potential risk. And that is a trade-off that many individuals see to be valuable in hiring an insurance agency.
Okay, Max, so thanks a lot.